All right, so we have a total of 9, I think it is, math questions, actual numeric, need to calculate something, math questions on your final exam. So we're going to go over those tonight in approximation. Again, you're going to have different numbers, but the process is the same. Slightly different scenario. But again, as long as you understand what you're looking for, that's the main issue with math. Mathematics can be a beautiful thing even if you don't like it, because it's the same thing every time you run across it. So like if you know how to calculate a land area or the area of a rented space, it's the same thing every time you run across it. If you have trouble with it, of course, it can be frustrating, keeping in mind that there are no duplicate math questions anywhere. You don't get 3 of the same or 2 of the same on your exam here or at the state exam. Although you can get questions in the same area. You can get multiple questions that will ask you to calculate a land area, for example, or an area. But one might be for a rented space and the other is for a purpose of the size of a lot or a legal description. You might get multiple commission-related questions, but they're going to be slightly different. Or you might get multiple finance-related questions, but one's calculating points and the other is calculating interest rate, or but amount of interest or principal paid or something like that. So again, we're going to go over 9 distinct questions. I'll just start, put them up on the board, and then leave them up as long as I can. Take whatever notes you can. Stop me along the way. There's really 30 to 45 minutes, probably tops, in this here without you stopping me to sort of ask questions. So again, they'll come up in a random manner on your final and at the state exam. But here I'm just going to walk you through them sort of roughly in the order they would have appeared to you in the text, so you'll have a sense of what we're talking about. So the first 2 questions are kind of what I label as sort of Chapter 5, Chapter 6 questions that relate to commission calculation. Early in the course, I joked that once this is your money, these are easy to do because it's really easy to kind of figure out how much you're going to get paid, that sort of thing. So you'll want to be able to basically calculate any of these. So here's what the question is going to roughly sound like, something like this. A property sells for $240,000 and the listing broker was entitled to 40% of the total commission. If the commission was 5% of the selling price, how much did the listing broker earn? So that's kind of roughly the way things can be worded. So every time you look at a finance question, what you need to do is figure out, okay, what in here matters and maybe what in here doesn't matter. Information can be placed into a finance question that is, or a math question rather, that is irrelevant and distracting. Right? So in any of these, you'll have information where maybe it's the sale price and you need the loan amount or whatever it is, where some of the dollars or some of the numbers that are there you don't want to touch. So let me just kind of memorialize here on the board what I just said. So we have a sale of $240,000, and this is, by the way, the best place to use your scratch paper is math. To use that to figure things out. In this class, you can write right on the test I give you. You might even say not to, but that's really dumb wording I have on there if it's still there. You just use that paper test I give you as all the scratch paper you need and kind of work things out. So you have a sale of $240,000. We have a commission, and I'm taking this a little bit out of order, but these are the things that matter to me first. We have a commission rate of 5%. And then it tells us that the listing broker is entitled to 40% of the total commission. So listing broker gets 40%. All right, so that's what it tells us. And then the question says, how much did the listing broker earn? So this is fairly straightforward, and at least in what I'm giving you right here, there's no extraneous information. But the question could, for example, just add something like the selling broker gets 60%. The selling broker splits it 50-50 with their office, whatever. Once you read the question first, get a sense of what they're asking you for, then go back and pick out the stuff that matters. Because then you'll more readily jump over the distracting information because you know it just doesn't apply. All right, so this should be relatively straightforward for everybody here, hopefully. I mean, it's just the sales price, right, the $240,000 times the 5% to get the total. And if you want to stop here and calculate $12,000 for that step of it, you can. Calculator-friendly math is just going to be 240,000 times 0.05 times 0.4. So it's the 12,000 then times the 40%, or $4,800. right? So for me, if I were gonna get that and had my calculator, I wouldn't have stopped for this intermediate step. I don't really care what the total commission is, I just need to know how much the listing broker gets. My formula would have been 240,000 times 0.05 times 0.4 equals 4,800. And I'm converting these percentages to decimals, but if you have a, calculator with a percentage key, obviously you can just take 240,000 times 5%, take that result times 40%, and get the same answer. Questions about that? Don't worry, they get harder. I know some of you look disappointed. All right, so another thing is just to be able to take the simplest version of that, and maybe you have to break it down, and maybe you don't have to break it down. So let's take a look at an example where where we're not even splitting it, just taking the basic commission. I probably should put these in the other order, but also knowing how to work with fractions and decimals and percentages. So this question reads, a property sold for $150,000 and the broker earned a 4.5% commission on the sale. What was the amount of the commission? So we're not even going to split it here, and this other one is even simpler. So we have a $150,000 sale. We have 4.5% commission rate, and then the question is, what's the total? So here, from the previous one, that math is obvious. It's 150,000 times 4.5%, which I'm going to put here as 0.045, and that should get me 67.50. So on your calculator, if you get a 0.5%, or 1/4% or something, again, you need to be able to sort of convert that to calculator-friendly math. 150,000 times 4.5% would be the same thing as 4.5.
Can you read me the question?
Yeah, sure can. You bet. I went over there fairly quickly, I'm sure. A property sells for 150,000, and the broker earns 4.5% commission on the sale. What's the amount of the commission? So same thing here, but without the split. So you'll have one, in whatever order they come, one that's just the simplest, straight commission question, and one that takes you to another level and asks you to split it in some manner. And that's really all the more complicated you'll get. I kind of like a commission question that I wrote for the state exam that I used to use here, where it says, it's got a lot of stuff in it. It says the house sells, the asking price is 150, the house sells for 145, the listing, the commission is 5% with 4% in the event of dual agency. Joe, the broker, represents the buyer and the seller. What's the commission? See, what's happening there is then you've got to sort out, okay, I don't care about the listing price, I only care about the sale price. I got a commission of 5% and I got a commission of 4%. Which one matters? Well, if I understand dual agency, it's the lower of the two because it says he represented both parties, right? So, that's the kind of math question you can get even with commissions that are simple. They can end up being a lot more complicated. What I've just given you is a rough idea of the actual language you'll see on your final here. But again, coming to the state exam, don't expect them to be quite that simple or straightforward. Questions about that at all? Wow, we're already up to chapter 9. It's pretty exciting. Okay, so chapter 9. I don't think I'm doing that one anymore. I think I have an old sheet here. I just realized looking at the sheet that I printed out.
Yeah, if it's 5%, it's 0.05.
Correct.
It's not 0.5.
No, correct. 0.5 would be a half.
Right.
Yeah, because that's 50 out of 100, right? Right. And one of the rules for the state exam for math questions writing is that you have to be able to readily or easily calculate the wrong answer. So something like that, for example, just being off by a spot in a decimal. Yeah, I'll tell you, writing math questions for the state exam, it's hard to write them where all 4 answers look possible. They're just, there's only so many ways to sort of twist something around or leave out one item or whatever. So oftentimes you get 3 answers where 1 is right, two can easily be calculated, then you're guessing at how do I make the fourth one? So something like a 0.5 versus 0.05 becomes a logical and acceptable way to do that. Unfortunately, it sort of picks up anybody who just has a slip of the key, but again, take your time and breathe deep and make sure you're, thinking about what you've got in front of you as you do it. You hope if you get the wrong answer, it won't be there. Bless you. This can be a saving grace of math questions. All right, let me walk through this first one with you, but I need to look up something online because I'm realizing that my aide here still has an old question that I got rid of and replaced. I think I remember what I replaced it with. I just want to make sure that I do that correct. I don't know why I didn't update that. All right, so simple question that you're going to get is an area of a parcel or multiple parcels. So this example reads the following. A rectangular piece of land is 242 feet deep and 180 feet wide. What does the parcel cover? So you can be given answers in square feet. You can be given answers in tenths or quarters or whatever of an acre. Right? So the issue here is just to come up with the square feet, but be able to convert between square feet and acres. And as I think I mentioned to you Thursday night, you can also get a question where there's no calculation involved, but where you're asked sort of which of the following is the largest, and you have to know, there's 43,560 square feet in an acre, and there's, how many, there's quarter sections, and one section of land is a square mile, that kind of thing, because you can get comparative questions. I don't think I have a comparative question on the final unless I went over it with you Thursday, but that's a really common question at the state exam, and there's some examples of those in your text. So let's go back and look at this one. So a rectangular piece of land is 242 feet by 180 feet. Length by width, depth by height, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's two-dimensional, it's two-dimensional. That's all that really matters. So let's just figure out, first of all, if we can calculate this in terms of square feet, right? So that's just literally 242 times 180. Anybody have a calculator handy? It should be, I was clever and figured this out right. 43,200. I got 43,560, is that right? Okay. Which, again, is here as a reminder for you to remember that that's how many square feet are in an acre, because that's exactly 1 acre. So if the problem were 242 by 179, for example, and one of the answers was whatever that is, 43,318 square feet or whatever it is, and one of it was 1 acre, and one of it was, you need to know the difference between the two. So again, math sometimes comes with principles involved in those same questions. But the basic idea here is to be able to multiply the length times the width, or the depth times the width, or the depth times the length, or whatever wording is given to you in the question, knowing that, like the surface area of the floor, it's two dimensions, one in one way, one in another. You multiply those two together, and you get the square of whatever that unit is. So if this was 242 inches by 180 inches, you'd have 43,560 square inches, right? I mean, so that's all that's happening here. So square feet can be written like this. Some people write it like this. I've worked with engineers where they would make a little square and then put the little foot symbol there. I do that sometimes. Any of those you might see, but this is probably the most common, one of the top two. And then if you are trying to figure out, what to do with that, you would take whatever number you get here and divide that by 43,560. So here we have, 43,560 on the bottom. This is how many square feet per acre. And up here we have how many square feet. I'm just going to put X. It happens to be what we got. So if this number were greater than 43,560, you would get a number that was larger than 1 if you divided that out, telling you that there's more than, right? There's more than 1 acre in the parcel. It happens to be exactly the same, so it's exactly 1. If this was less than 43,560, you would get something that's a decimal, and it would tell you, okay, it's 0.9 acres or 0.8 or whatever it is. We did the math on my lot, if you remember, it was like 0.23 some acres when we did that. All right, so be familiar with being able to calculate, being able to calculate a land area dimension. I'm gonna skip looking this one up and just pull something out of my head, because I'm pretty sure I now remember what I replaced this. I used to have a volume question, and I've taken it out because I think the way I wrote it was a little complicated. Keep in mind, you may have one volume question at the state exam. By volume, a cubic dimension. You know, this would be where you've got 3 feet this way, 3 feet this way, and 3 feet this way to get a cubic yard. Kinds of questions you can get a volume question about at the state exam could be, the question I used to use, building is so long, it's so wide, and so high, and it rents by X dollars per cubic foot or cubic yard, what's the rent for the building? Or the question that I remember is, the house is 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, and you know, how many cubic feet of air does the HVAC contractor have to concern himself with? Something like that. It's very rare, very unusual, but they can exist. Again, it's one question, so you might want to be comfortable with that, but I wouldn't have that be the question that keeps you from going to the state exam. All right, so the second or other math question from chapter 9 is going to relate to square feet and square yards. So the question will read something like this: that there's a room in the house that's 10 feet by 18 feet. Let's say this is the kitchen. The kitchen is 10 feet wide by 18 feet long, and the homeowner wants to put in new sheet vinyl. How many square yards of flooring do they need to order? So again, looking at what we just went through, that length times width gives us the square of that dimension. We can do that fairly readily. Right? 10 feet times 18 feet is going to get us 180 square feet. But the question asks, how many square yards of flooring do you need? So what do we do now? We divide by 9. Why? Because there are 9 square feet per square yard. 9 square feet equals 1 square yard. You can see it again on the floor. If you take, 3 feet in this direction and 3 feet in this direction, that's 1 by 1 in terms of yards. So you've got 1 square yard, but 3 by 3 in feet, 9 square feet. These tiles that I'm standing on that are on the floor are each 1 foot square. So the next step then is to take 180 divided by 9, and that's going to give us 20 square yards. So you take the length times the width in feet to get the square feet. You take that result and divide it by 9, and that's going to give you the answer. This could be couched in how many square yards of asphalt to pave the driveway or parking lot, how many square yards of carpet for the living room, how many square yards of linoleum for the kitchen. These are all common. Seating and cedar sod is also a pretty common thing that's quoted in square yards if you do much renovation or building type work, which property managers do. Questions about that? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question that
Yes.
it relates to
Yes.
chapter 2. It's question number 22. I think it's related to it. I just don't understand how we got the answer.
Oh, yeah. So that's an example of the kind of question I used to have on the final, but don't anymore. So, but that's right. I'll walk you through this. We have a few minutes. That's part of what tonight is for. So this is from test 2. You said is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is question 22 from test 2 for those of you who want to look it up or follow along. And this was in here because this used to be a question on the final, but too many people missed it. So
Question 22?
question 22 on test 2. Yeah. So it reads, the warehouse space is rented at the monthly rate of 50 cents per cubic yard, and the leased space is 60 feet long by 300 feet, or 60 feet by 300 feet by 20 feet high. Approximately how much is the monthly warehouse rent? So I just have to do this out of my head since I don't really know what this is. So let's just take the dimensions first. So we have 60 times 300 times 20, and they're all in feet, right? That's what this thing said. So I just need to multiply those 3 together. I don't even care what's length, what's width, what's height, doesn't matter. I just need to get a cubic volume. So 60 by 300 by 20 is what, 36,000, is that correct? 360,000? Thank you. Equals 360,000 cubic feet. Then I gotta look at the question, and what do they give us? They give me 50 cents per cubic yard. So that's a challenge, because now I have a mismatch, and this can happen. I have the dimensions in cubic feet, and I have the question in cubic yards. So what I need to know is how many cubic yards I have. So in this example, and again, I'm not putting this on your final, you would take 360,000 cubic feet and divide it by 27 cubic feet per cubic yard. The cubic feet cancel out.
Where could you 27?
That's a number, that's just in chapter 9. If you take a cube, 1 foot, 1 yard by 1 yard, and then cube it, let me just put it out here for you. 1 yard times 1 yard times 1 yard, right, equals 1 cubic yard. But those are also 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, equals 27 cubic feet. So this is one step nastier than this. Again, this is what's on your final. This is what I used to test, but people did terribly. And this comes from a state sample exam question, so something like that could, in theory, be on the state exam. So what you've done here is go from a square dimension to a cubic dimension. So it's 36,000 divided by 27, whatever that works out to. 13,000 something, what is it?
No, it's 13 first, right? 13, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3.
Is that what it is?
And then you divide it, times it by 0.5, and then it's
Yeah.
all the sixes.
Then you multiply that times the rental rate of 50 cents per cubic yard, and then you get, rounding, I guess I could do that, but yeah, I guess I rounded it to the dollar. So that's the answer to how that was calculated. So again, that's question 22 from practice unit test number 2 that you took earlier. Go ahead, Steve.
You mentioned something earlier about dual agency and commissions and
Yeah.
the lower one.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Well, again, I'm not testing you on the math for that, but what happens sometimes is not mentioned in the book. This is in practice, and this is a question for managing brokers and for you when you're in the field to decide if you want to try and entice someone to accept dual agency. So we're talking about when somebody's at a listing presentation and you explain to them dual agency because you'd love to represent both sides of any given transaction because you make more money. And the seller balks at the idea. They're like, well, why would we want you to represent the other side, et cetera? You can explain to them, walk them through the disclosure, explain to them what you can still do for them, et cetera. And some brokers offer an incentive to their prospective clients that, well, our normal commission is, let's just give them some examples, 5%, but if it's dual agency, we'll do it for 4.5 or 4. I've even done that a time or two. I don't tend to offer that right off the bat unless I'm offering to do somebody a favor, but it can create a scenario where a seller who might not sign up for dual agency at the listing appointment would be willing to do so. Again, that's a policy and procedures question for your sponsoring broker, whether they will allow you to do that sort of thing. It's even a question for yourself, do I want to offer that? If you already have a buyer who now you show your listing and you were going to sell that buyer something and now you're doing a dual agency, you'll make less money because you would have gotten a full co-op fee with that buyer and now you would have gotten the full listing side with your seller. But that's unusual. The more typical scenario is you have a listing, buyer just pops out of the woodwork, wants to see the property, and boom, there they go. Another advantage to the seller in that isn't that they save money, but somebody might not quite qualify otherwise or whatever. They can sell the house for less money. Maybe they net the same. The other thing that happens with that that's a little bit quirky is you have to disclose that in the MLS that you have a variable commission, and most agents never look at this because if you have multiple offers and you have a dual agency offer as one of them at the same time, that dual agency offer will have a competitive advantage over all the others because your fee is 0.5% less or 1% less or whatever. Most brokers never notice it in the MLS, but it's there to forewarn the other brokers that, hey, I've got a competitive advantage financially in a dual agency deal. long answer to what's really a simple question, but it's kind of the games people play sometimes within the industry. As an individual operating broker, I kind of like it. As a managing broker, I don't. Kind of depends upon what hat I'm wearing. That incentive, that lower commission. Any other questions about this stuff so far? Or whatever else that's popped into your heads? All right, so that takes us up through chapter 9. I think I can do the last one here all the way over to the right. Let's see if I can do this. I'll turn this, see how I'm going to do it my cinematography by turning this. I don't even know if it's really going to be visible because of the sunlight coming in. Can you all see this okay? The board, everything's okay. All right, so on this last one, before I erase and start working back this way, it's a real estate tax question. So the chapter 10 question is going to revolve specifically around, here's a property, it's worth X, here's the tax rate, either is or isn't an equalization factor, what's the tax bill? So it's going to read something like this. What is the amount of real estate tax due on a house with a market value of $320,000 if it is assessed at 40% of market value, has an equalization factor of 1.2, and a tax rate of $6 per 100 of assessed value? So again, I'll just kind of put the salient information up here. What's the amount of tax due on a house with a market value of $320 if it's assessed at 40% of market value, has an equalization factor of 1.2, and a tax rate of $6 per 100? So I need to know the market value, or residential fair cash value, or whatever terminology is given to you. This is what the assessor would have determined the property would be worth in a fair market, arm's length transaction. The assessment rate of 40%, we should remember by now that the actual assessment rate in Illinois is typically 1/3 or 33.33%, but in math questions you can be given any assessment rate whatsoever. Equalization factor of 1.2. This equalization factor can be any number around or even including 1. There's no guarantee there will actually even be an equalization factor in your question. If it's not there, you just skip it, or if you want to go through the steps, you multiply by 1 and nothing will change. It's like with a tax bill, sometimes you have them, sometimes you don't. And then we're giving a tax rate of $6 per 100. This can be written in a number of different ways. Please remember that at the state exam, it's very possible, it's not uncommon, if you get a question like this, that it might be phrased in mils. Mils here would read 60, because it's $60 per 1,000. I don't know that anybody uses mils in practice anymore, but again, the state exam, things can be a little bit different. So this could also be listed or given to you as 6% or 0.06, but I'm giving you the basic language, so I think this is what I have in the question, dollars per 100. All right, so then the question is what to do with the math, and the way I've worded this, kind of the math works from top down, all multiplication based upon the way I'm giving you the problem. So you've got a market value of $320,000 times the assessment rate of 40%, or 0.4 gives us an assessed rate on the property of whatever that's going to be. I guess I only have thank you, 128,000. And then we're going to take that and multiply that times the equalization factor of 1.2.
And that's 153,600.
Thank you. We're basically adding 20% to the value for whatever assessment purposes that somebody farther up the line from the assessor thought they should do. And then we're going to take that times 6% or 0.06, or you can divide this by 100, then multiply times 6. It's just easier to do it in this kind of way. And that should,
Times it by what? I'm sorry.
that's all right, let me get out of the way here. You're going to multiply it either times 0.06 or 6% is the easiest way I would see that, because $6 per 100 is a percentage. Literally, that's what percentage means, per 100. It was for whatever reason, it was always easier for me to understand once I studied a little Spanish, because por ciento, per 100, made more sense to me than the word percentage, but it's the same thing, right? Percent, same idea. So I've converted the 6% here to 0.06, because 0.06 and 6% and $6 per 100 and 60 mils and $60 per 1,000 are all the same thing.
Okay. So in mills, it would be $60 per 1,000?
Correct, or just 60 mils, actually. 60 mils means $60 per 1,000. So like a percent is per 100, a mil is per 1,000.
Okay.
And again, that's a state exam thing. You could,
Mills,
don't need it on my final, and you don't need it in real life. Steve, go
Should
ahead.
we assume in any test that we get that the assessed valuation isn't mentioned, that you go by what you have, you don't put it in there without, like in Illinois, it'd be 33%.
Well, to answer your question, can you assume that it's 33%? I have never seen a math question, ever, for property taxes that leave the assessment rate blank, unless it starts off with an assessed value, which one of your practice questions did. You know, where they don't give you an assessment rate, but they automatically gave you this down here. But yeah, I guess, you know, in theory, to answer your question that way, the answer would be yes. If it's an Illinois tax question, you would just use the rate you know to be a third or 33.33% or whatever and go from there. But again, I've never seen a math question that combines those two. Not that there isn't, I've just not seen one. Other questions or any bit of confusion regarding this? Again, this formula is just market value times assessment rate times equalization factor times tax rate to get the annual tax bill. In theory, I could ask you, you know, how much is in each installment? I'm not. I could ask you how much money gets set aside in each mortgage payment as part of the escrow account. I'm not. Right? And you should be able to make that leap as well, which would just be dividing this by 2 or by 12 if you had those kinds of situations. All right. So I'm going to go back and start by erasing and working back on this other end. That's basically half or a little over half of what we're going to see. So now we're moving on to finance. So the first of the two finance-related questions that you're going to get will be one of these where you have to pick out distracting information and sort of follow the bonds involved. An investor purchases a building for $500,000 by paying 25% down and financing the rest of the purchase price. The lender charges 2 points as a loan origination fee. How much was the investor charged for the fee? So again, we just want to go back and kind of figure out what matters. We have a sale price, we have a down payment amount, we have a fee that relates to the loan, and we have a question that says how much is that fee? $500,000 sale. $25% down payment. $2 points, which you should be able to remember, means 2%, right? Yep. And then how much is the fee? So here's how I'm going to handle it. This is how I do this. I'm going to take the $500,000 and I'm going to invert the down payment amount. Because all I really want to know is how much is the loan. I don't care what the sale is, except that in this question, it allows me to calculate the loan amount. So my math is going to look like this. 100%, which is the total thing, minus the down payment, equals a 75% loan to value loan. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to do that in my head. I wouldn't even do that, but I'm going to take 500,000 times 75%, or 0.75, which is going to tell me I've got, what, a $375,000 loan, right?
Mhm.
Everybody following what I've done there? Yeah, because the down payment is it's the shadow of what I want, it's the reverse of what I want. So I'm just, before I even get into the math, rather than calculate the down payment and then subtract it, I've done that up here. But you could say, well, I want 500,000 times 25%, that's $125,000 down payment. I'm going to subtract the 125,000 from 500 and come up with the same $375,000 loan. If you do it that way, that's perfectly fine. This happens to me in my head automatically, so it's easier to just go feel like I'm going straight to this. So then I just take this 375,000 and multiply it times 0.02 or 2%. So I have a $7,500 loan origination fee. Or it could be discount points if the question were worded a little bit differently. So the term point usually just simply refers to a percent. The only difference with that is if anybody ever uses the term basis point, and this is not for the exams, a basis point is 1/100th. So 100 basis points equals 1 percentage point. That's common conversation in loans, at least commercial type stuff that I'm used to. So again, I'm taking the sale amount, subtracting out the down payment, and I'm doing it this way, multiplying that times the loan to value percentage, coming up with the loan amount, multiplying that times the number of points converted to a percentage, and that's how I get the fee. Okay? Are you all right with that?
What does LOF stand for?
Loan origination fee. I'm just lazy. Again, it could be discount points, and the math would be exactly the same. And it doesn't matter if it's an investor loan, if it's a homeowner. It doesn't matter who, these questions paint these scenarios. All you really want are those numbers. The rest of the stuff, who cares? I don't need a picture. I just, want the details. All right, so the next and last of the finance questions is a complete revisit of what we went over at length, and it's on the PowerPoint slides in Chapter 16, and it's what's in the finance kind of math calculation box in Chapter 16. A borrower has an amortized loan for $200,000 with an interest rate of 6%. If the monthly payment is $1,160, what is the loan balance after the first payment? So, what we've been given here is a loan amount, an interest rate, and a payment amount. Exactly like we went over in class, exactly like is in the textbook.
What was that payment amount?
I'll put it all up here now. So the loan is $200,000. The interest rate is 6%, and the payment is $1,160. And that's going to be principal and interest. We don't care about taxes and insurance in a question like this, at least. All right, so I'll give you a minute to kind of think about that, see if anybody remembers how we walked through and did that. And there are probably a few different ways to do it, but I'm going to do it the same methodology that we did, it's in the book, and that we did on the slides. So this is a multi-step process. Again, in this question for tonight, I'm asking you what's the ending balance. But it could be how much interest was paid, or it could be how much principal was paid, because we're going to calculate those along the way. So it's just also a matter of kind of recognition of what do each of these numbers mean. So it's 200,000 times 6%, which I'm just going to convert to 0.06, and this is going to be $12,000 in interest per year, but I don't care about the year, so I take the annual interest amount and I divide that by 12, which gives me $1,000 in interest for that month. The other way to do this, for those of you who are more into sort of typical finance, it would be 200,000 times 0.06 divided by 12, all in one step. That's kind of more typical principles of finance math that you're going to get in an upper division college finance course. All I've done is break this out into two different steps so you can see it more readily. And again, it mirrors the way it's done in the book. So if the question was how much interest was paid in the first month, you're done. You've already got it. But if it's not, which it is not in this example, we have to take the principal and interest amount of 1160, subtract out, let me just do it this way so we don't forget, of P and I, principal and interest, subtract out $1,000 of interest, and that's going to equal a principal amount of 160. So if the question is how much principal is paid in that month's payment, now you're done. But in this example, it still isn't, so it's asking the final balance. So the final step is to say, well, I opened, before I made the payment, I owed $200,000. The principal I'm going to get credit is 160. So I take the opening loan balance for the month of 200,000, subtract out the 160 that I just paid, and now the final balance is 199,840. I've done my math correct along the way. So again, you're given a loan balance, you're given an interest rate. The presumption is it's exactly 1 month calculation in 30 days, whatever you need. There's nothing extraneous, no extra things. There's no tax escrow in here. There's no homeowner's insurance to worry about. You just need to convert this interest to a monthly amount, and you can get asked one of 3 questions. How much interest was paid in the month, how much principal was paid in the month, or what's the final loan balance? And we've just walked through that for at least the 3rd time. And again, this is a common, not everybody gets this, but this is a math question that you can see based on finance at the state exam. It's one of these multi-layered questions. I don't hear any sobbing, so I'm assuming we're doing okay. Steve, go ahead.
It goes into the second month on the question, because I think I saw that in some of the test questions in the book.
I think, yeah, maybe just to, yeah.
Do we apply that interest rate to the balance then?
Yeah, same way we did it on the slides where we went to the second month, it would, if they give you this stuff and they said how much interest in the second month, the math would be the same. You would just stick this in here and let the results be whatever they are, right? You just take 199,840 times 0.06 would be something less than this. This would be something less. This would be something more, right? That would be what would happen. Again, if we wanted to, we could do a whole 360-month amortization schedule that way.
You can just keep it at 1 month.
Yes. The examples, coward. The examples that I'm giving you here are worded pretty much like you're going to see them on the final. So there's no language surprises, nothing that's completely out of the blue. I realize that for about half students in these classes, math is terrifying. So it's one of the reasons why we're leaving it for the end, because we save the best for last. But also since there's the least amount of time to sort of forget or be confused about something. But again, I'm giving you the wording so that there's the least amount of confusion about the wording, and you can just kind of focus on the formula as you get there.
What was the question for that?
This one here?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll just read it again. A borrower has an amortized loan for $200,000 with an interest rate of 6%. If the monthly payment is $1,160, what is the loan balance after the first payment? Any other questions about that? You are welcome. All right, so we're down to just 2 remaining. These last 2 questions are out of chapters 18 and 19. Chapter 18 is one we talked about, but I'm not sure it really specifies it in the text. So hopefully you don't have any problems following along with this. It's a vacancy or occupancy rate question. So here's how it's going to word. It's relatively simple. If an apartment building has 12 vacancies among its 300 units, the building's vacancy rate is. So you'll be given, like here, 12 units vacant, 300 units total. What is the vacancy rate? And here you just take the vacant number of units and divide it by the total. Right? So it's vacant divided by total equals a vacancy rate. Same thing would be true for occupancy rate. You would take the occupancy and divide it by that and get an occupancy rate. So the math is just 12 divided by 300, and that should work out to what, 0.04, which equals 4%. So if you were given 12 units vacant, 300 units total, and said, what's the occupancy rate? And I'm not doing that, but if I was, you could still calculate the vacancy rate and just subtract this from 100 and get a 96% occupancy rate. Or you could say, well, if there's 12 units vacant, that means there's 288 units occupied, divide 288 by 300 and get it the same way. That's not a very common question, but we talk a lot in the business about occupancy or vacancy rates, and I wanted to give you a mathematical representation of it so you could kind of see what it looks like. So it will be apartments because it's relatively simple. So it's literally the number of units that are vacant divided by the number of units in total, and that gives you your answer. It's just that, the math is just that simple. And the last question from chapter 19, is both math and principles. If a house sold for $200,000, if the house is sold for $200,000 and appraises at $180,000, and a lender is willing to make a loan at 75% loan-to-value ratio, what is the amount the lender is most likely willing to loan? So the principle you're being tested on here, one that again I'm not too sure is clear in the book, is what? The lender loans on what basis? The lower of the two, whether it's the appraisal or the sale price, or this could be reversed. It could give you a $200,000 appraisal and a $180,000 sale price. Doesn't matter. You're just going to go to the lower number and multiply it times the loan to value to get the loan. So here again, here's the details. We have a $200,000 sale. We have a $180,000 appraisal. We have a 75% loan to value. Those are the givens. And the question is, what's the lender most likely going to loan on a deal like this?
Did they ever ask what would the down payment be?
It could. I mean, in which case, I think you're surmising, right? You would just have you apply the lower number to the opposite, the inverse of the 75% LTV, which would be 25% down. I mean, that's kind of simplistic because there's more involved than just cash or whatever, but yeah, it's a possibility. I don't, sometimes it's difficult to know when we're calculating math questions, how deeply are we really expecting somebody to think, as opposed to how much do we want them to sort of prove they understand the basics, right? Because for some of us, we might understand the theory and get the idea, but if we start making it really complicated, then it becomes more like a question like this, which in practice you may never have to do. All right, so again, what numbers do I want to use here? Yep, so I'll take the 180,000 times 0.75. And for whatever reason, I don't have the right answer on my thing. What does that work out to?
I have 135,000.
Looks about right. I have a mistake in my answer key. I keep threatening to myself to fix it, and I never do for my checking my thing here. So, yeah, so that's that. So again, it's a combination of math and the principle. You've got to figure out which number applies, apply it, and then you're good. So again, that's a very important thing to know for practice. Lender's loan on the lower of sale or appraisal value. The rare exceptions to that are atypical loan programs. But in the typical residential Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, governed world of specific underwriting regs, FHA, VA, whatever, nobody is gonna do anything other than loan at the lower of those two numbers. And one of the reasons why it's a bit of a challenge for us today is because since the last round of congressional meddling in real estate laws, we now have this requirement of this need for appraisers and lenders to be somewhat distanced, or for lenders to be able to prove they're not interfering with their appraisers, hence we have a lot of these appraisal management companies. And so you're getting appraisers come from Palatine to appraise in Sugar Grove, or they don't know the market, and vice versa. And so you sometimes get appraisals today that aren't what they should be because the appraiser just wasn't as good as somebody who's been appraising every day in Aurora, or every day in Sugar Grove, or every day in LaGrange. So from time to time, you're left with trying to figure out, how do we deal with this? Are we going to negotiate something different, or are we going to work with the appraiser and try and convince him that his or her numbers are wrong? And by the way, one thing you might want to consider in practice, and talk to your broker about this, but if you get a deal where you think the appraisal is wrong and you can't convince the appraiser, you might want to, especially if you're representing the buyer, you might want to just offer to the buyer, you know what, why don't you ask the bank to get a second appraisal, and whether it's good or not, I'll pay for it. This is a business decision, right? Because if it's $300 to get the place reappraised by a whole other appraiser, and you don't have to spend any time showing them another place, that would be money well spent. But that's the kind of sort of mature decision you want to make after you've been in the business for a while, not something you want to be throwing your own money around a lot. But I've had several experiences over the years where I wish I had just thought a little bit differently and made the deal go together, because it would have saved me a lot of time. And if you have time, you can go out and make another deal happen. All right, so that's really the math. Those are the 9 questions that we just went over. Any other questions about those, or anything else related to mathematics at all, about the final exam or state exam or whatever? Yes?
Can you go over question 33 for chapters 1 to 6?
Mm-hmm. Is this one of the upside down commission questions?
Yeah, this is a commission question. It states that the answer is 72,000, correct?
Yeah.
And I got it, but working with that provided.
Oh, but that's good.
But that's the answer that I got, see.
Yeah. So you did the typical, what you did here, Mandy, was you did the typical thing that people do, but to get the right answer, eventually you did what you have to do if you're not sure, which is to go back and just do them forward 4 times until you figure out it's right. So what she's asked me to go over, so for those of you who want to look this up again, this is unit test number 1, and this is test question number 33. And this is a fairly common state exam math question also, hence I gave you a couple of sample questions in your first unit test. Again, it used to be something I had on the old version of the test, so I'm going to move that over here and do this here. This is not a question on your final in 2 days, but again, this is something you should be able to do, and this kind of thinking fits with how people ask you questions when you're talking to them about selling their property. So the question reads, the Stopex house was listed at $74,500, but the couple anticipated a minimum net of $67,500. They actually netted $67,680 after paying a 6% commission, but before closing costs were deducted. What was the selling price? So again, a combination of principles and distracting math. So here's all the stuff you're given. So we list at $74,500. The minimum net that they needed to be able to buy their next house or whatever was $67,500. The actual net to the sellers was $67,680, and this is the actual net. And it tells us after a 6% commission, so we have a 6% commission rate. What was the selling price? So I gave you back when we did that, back in that chapter 6, I think it was, kind of an upside down sort of formula. So it's the net dollars to the seller divided by the net percentage to the seller that will give us the selling price. Now this question, again, it's worded, it's a little wordy, it can be a little confusing, but what they're saying basically is we don't care what happened with the other closing costs. The other closing costs came out of their 67,680. So we're going to take our 67,680. We don't care about the 67.5. We don't care about the estimate. This question asks about the actual. So we're going to take 67,680 and divide that by 94%. Because 6% of the proceeds went to the brokers. So out of this 67,680, which represents 100% of the net proceeds to the seller, 6 pieces of that, or 6 out of 100 out of that, went to the brokers. So we have 0.94 down here for the net to the net percentage to the seller. And if I divide that out, I should get 72,000. And again, that's kind of an upside down and backwards way to calculate something, but this is the sort of question you could get at the state exam. And we spent some time going over this when we did chapter 6. I do think I remember some crying at that point in time. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you.
Aren't commission rates based on gross?
They are. And so because we're doing this backwards, we can ignore the closing costs, because what would happen is the closing costs would come out of this, right? So what we're doing here is basing it on the gross, because if we reverse this, the math would look like this. 72,000 times the 0.94 equals 67,680, right? By taking the 6% out of it, I could also do it like this. 72,000 times 6% equals, whatever this is here, $4,320. And then take 72,000 minus the 4,320, and that's going to equal 67,680. So here's one way to do that. Here's the other way to do that. And I prefer this way because this way can be reversed, where this way mathematically cannot be easily reversed.
I'm not lost in the math, I'm lost on reading things into what
Yeah.
is normal, like 6% on the gross. You shouldn't even think, you just read the question and that's it, and don't think that that the 6% is not a net commission.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I mean, so that's the common problem is, and I think this is exactly what Mandy did, was just saying this is what most people do, is they take this 67,680, multiply it times 6%, try and add that, thinking they're going to get back up to 72,000, and that doesn't work. So that's the thing to watch out for. That's why it's important to be able to see this upside down and backwards. The only way this works is if you do it the way on the bottom, or as Mandy ended up doing, test all 4 possibilities times 6% and subtract out the net to see which one fits.
I thought it was a misprint when I was reading it, thinking that it should have been a gross amount, and they forgot to add that in.
Yeah, no, this is, again, this is kind of a challenging question for a lot of people. And that was question 33, right?
Yes.
From the very first practice unit, paper practice unit test that I gave you.
So I think there's another example on this one too.
Yeah.
It's question 18. It says the seller wants to net $108,000 from the sale of his home. He must pay his broker a 6% commission. The seller would need a gross selling price of.
And that's a more common way that question is worded. You sit down at a listing to work with somebody, and they'll say something like, we need to get $50,000 out of this house so we can buy our dream house. You want a 5% commission. What do we need to sell the place for so we get 50 grand and you get your fee? You see what I'm saying? And so really quickly, if I just ignore all the other closing costs, I should be able to say, okay, 50,000 divided by 95%, that gets them what they want, based upon what I just described. So in that case there, you're going to take whatever their minimum net is, and you're going to divide that by the percentage that they're going to get, and that will give you the answer. So the commission was how much in that question?
The commission was 6%.
Okay, so whatever the minimum net is in that question, you're going to divide that by 94%,
94%.
which is exactly what we did here.
Exactly.
A little bit different wording, and that question, which is which one again? Let me repeat that.
Question 18.
So question 18 on your first paper practice unit test is a question like this with different wording, but the math is identical, and that's the way that thing kind of comes at you in practice, where that seller is trying to figure out, okay, what do we have to sell this thing for so I can get what I need? And the closest I ever had to come to that, I may have told you the story, but was on a townhouse some years ago where the two sisters who had bought the place decided that they loved each other as sisters and hated each other as co-owners. And this was only about a year or two after they bought the place. And my marching orders were, I don't want to write a check. I don't care if I don't get any of my down payment money back. I just don't want to write a check. And they walked away from that closing with $168. When we were negotiating the final fee on the thing, on the commission on the deal, it was even more complicated than it sounds. When we were negotiating the final sale price, I had to make sure that I wasn't $10, $20, $30, $40 over. So I literally had to know what all their closing costs were going to be. I chickened out a little here and there. That's why they got $160 back. But that can happen to you in practice, where you really got to make sure you're that precise. If somebody's just trying to be, I don't want to be a short sale, I don't want to write a check, I just want to get out, you need to kind of be able to do this upside down and figure that out. Go ahead,
You
Chris.
said there's gonna be no questions, with prepayment penalties?
Yeah, on the final, there's no prepayment penalty math question. Again, there could be at the state exam, and if there is, it could be at the end of this kind of calculation.
Okay.
So where, we're looking at this kind of calculation where you've gone through all those steps, that prepayment penalty, and again, it's a state sample exam question. You'd have to go through all of this, and the other given here would be a prepayment penalty of 2%, 3%, for example, and then they could ask you one of two things. How much is the prepayment penalty? In which case you would just apply the percentage times this, and that would be your answer. Or it could be, what's the final loan payoff, including a 2% prepayment penalty, which would be this plus the 2 or 3%, whatever I would have given you, prepayment penalty.
Okay.
So that's probably, I would say that's probably as challenging, simply because now instead of 4 steps, you're going through a 5th, almost a 6th step to get there. Again, one possible question at the state exam, not that likely to see, but
Yeah.
it's one of their samples, so it's a possibility.
Yeah, I just ran into a question where, the guy paid it off at the end of the month, but he didn't pay the interest of that previous month at all.
Okay, so he still had to pay that later. Is that what you're?
He still had to pay it, when he paid the final, balance in principal?
Yeah, well, that's what's happening here. I mean, so let's just say that this is August 1st. If you make this payment on August 1st and your payment is always due on the 1st, then there's no, and you pay the loan off with no prepayment penalty, that would be what you would pay. You'd make your loan payment, which would include July's interest, you would pay that for principal, and there'd be nothing left. So the payoff on August 1st would be $1,160 plus this, right? Because you would have accrued that $1,000 in interest. So what happens is now, if this closing is on August 30th instead of on August 1st, you've got 30 days of interest accruing. So at the beginning of the month, we had the $199,840, but now you got to pay this off at closing. You have to run a whole other calculation and add the interest for that month on top of the loan balance. Right? Is that what you're describing there?
Yeah, I thought that you did that, but when I went through the answer, it didn't add the interest at all for that month.
Right, this accrued interest here is for the prior month. Interest is always accruing behind. So when you make your mortgage payment on the 1st, that was for the prior month's interest. So if you then don't have a payment due for 31 days, but you have a loan closing because you pay it off or you refinance it, and the question is what's the loan payoff amount, it's going to be that opening balance of principal plus however much interest has accrued since that payment was due or made until that point in time. Another thing I suppose you could run into in practice, if you were helping somebody estimate what they're going to get out of their sale, I'm not doing that to you here, I'm just assuming that the payment and the balance are all calculated on the exact same day when they were due. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, can you go over to question 27 for?
You have to tell me what it is. I have no idea what it is.
King County homeowner paid the first installment of his
Oh.
real estate tax bill
Yeah.
of $1,430 2 months late. What was the penalty?
Oh. All right, so this is a good question because it goes back to the theory we talked about on Thursday. Remember that the penalty is what on a late tax bill? Yeah, 1.5%, and that's not accrued, it's not compounded. So You just need to know how many months and how much is it. So the amount that was due was how much?
1,430.
So 1430, and you would simply multiply that times 1.5%, and it's 2 months late?
Correct.
So that would be what the penalty amount is. So whatever that works out to be. I could use my calculator, but I don't feel like working that hard. I'll let you guys do that. And what was the question? Did they want the final amount or just the amount of the
What
penalty?
was the penalty?
Okay, then your answer would be right in here. Whatever that works out to, that's gonna be the tax penalty. And if you remember the tax bill at all, that's what would show up in that, you know, here's what you would owe every month if you're late or whatever.
So this came to 2.9.
You're welcome. Other questions? Other questions about anything else at all? Doesn't have to be off the unit test, doesn't have to be for the math. You can always go over those after break if anybody wants to hang out afterwards. So what I'm gonna do is give you guys the course evaluations. They require these to be completed using a blue or a black pen, different than, you know, a lot of stuff which is done in pencil. There are instructions here up at the top that tell you how to do those, so please take a look at those. These are kind of new. I'm gonna go ahead and pause this